Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I'm trying to pick some quinces and succeeding to a certain extent with these lovely, fragrant fruits. You can't eat them raw, you have to cook them, and you can either stew them or you can roast them and they soften, and then the flavour retains that perfume quality without being overpowering. If you add 1 quince to 10 apples, it will improve any apple dish that you can come up with. They will take a lot more damp than either apples or pears, which is why they're here in the damp garden, and they're adapted to almost any soil. They don't grow too big, and they have fabulous blossom. So, I think almost the ideal small garden tree. On today's programme, we join Frances on her allotment as she assesses her fruit and veg growing year.
Like all of us, I have had some successes and some not so great successes. But now it's time to take stock of my little plot.
Carol celebrates the glorious colours of autumn at Higcote Manor Garden in Gloucestershire.
The showy blooms of summer may have disappeared, but this time of year has its own colour to offer.
And I'll be back here at the pond getting it ready for winter. We have had torrential rain here at Longmeadow over the last few days. Now, I did manage to bring most of the succulents in. It was a very sodden process, but it was important because the one thing that all these succulent plants hate more than anything else is being waterlogged. They just rot off and die. And remember that succulents have evolved to store water in the leaves. So you can see this Echeveria has got really plump, fat leaves full of moisture, and then they will draw on that as they need it. And I probably won't water them again until well into the new year. So if you're storing succulent plants like aeoniums or Echeverias at home, put them on a bright windowsill or a porch, or if you've got a conservatory, that's fantastic. Preferably somewhere cool. As long as they're frost-free, they'll be fine. So not above a radiator, and don't water them. And try and enjoy them, because they'll still look really good all winter. This agave is really spiny, so I'm going to put that back like that, and that in front of it. And I've created a little display for them. These are just plasterers trestles, scaffolding boards. I've raised them up high so I can get plants underneath. I've got displays down on the ground. I've got streptocarpus flowering in the shade. They love that little corner. And I've even got some begonias. So what it means is this greenhouse in winter becomes a kind of conservatory. So on a grey November or December day, this is where you'll find me. Now, it's time to pay our last visit to Adam's garden this year, where he is also preparing for winter.
Really has been some year, hasn't it? And I knew this garden was incredibly important to me, I suppose, and the family, but I didn't realise how important. And if you're anything like me, that space outside the back door has more or less become a sanctuary. You know, the funny thing is I thought I'd get on top of the jobs in the garden, and my list by now would be quite short, but it's not. So I suppose on that note, we'd best crack on. This year I've spent so much more time at home, and it's made me understand parts of the garden that were becoming frustrating, you know, but I have spent so much time just out looking at this border at different times of the day and slowly working out what it is that it's missing. I'll be honest, this is the third time that I'm revisiting, digging stuff out and putting new stuff in, and I think the hedge is overpowering, and what I was worried about was how I bring that hedge down into the space. So the whole time you're trying to build these layers. So I've decided here I'm going to put in a tree. That then will connect to the orchard. Then I've got a pivot point to start building off. And I'm happy with there. The agastache looks lovely. Eupatorium here, good late colour. Then if I come down a level, if you look in here, what's lovely about this, Amsonia, which is, oh, the foliage just looks fantastic in the autumn. You know, it's quite willowy, so if you imagine as that matures, that then has a connection with the willow that's back in the border. I've realised I need a plant here at a lower level, and I think I have the solution. So this is called Persicaria fat domino. So they do look fantastic with grasses, semi-shade, quite happy, you know, reasonable garden soil. This is going to look lovely against that Salix magnifica. All I hope is that this time next year I'm not digging it up and we're not having the same conversation. I've also had time to reflect on another area of the garden, which needs some work. So, got to use your imagination. I'm sat here at 5:30 in the morning, just having a moment and enjoying that view. I always knew it was a lovely place just to stop and be. But I want to put more here to enjoy, more detail, more things just to make you pause. Pots are wonderful at that because you can arrange them and they can follow you through the season. So I've arranged a couple up here, which are planted up. I just want to work a few more down there. I started off putting single plants in pots to create structure, much as you would in a border. That idea in using singular pots, you know, for me works incredibly well because as this season evolves and changes, I can just chop things out and in. And also you don't have to commit to your final piece of design because tomorrow morning, if I come out and it doesn't look so good, it doesn't matter. So if you've never really done pot displays, that's not a bad way to start. But at the same time, you know, you might just have 2 pots either side of a doorway, and it's nice to make a statement. There's all sorts of plants that are good for winter interest. Here, I've used Mahonia, Viburnum, and this, Agni Kapal. It's delicious. Scented edible berries that last well into autumn. But it will need a bit of protection as it gets colder. And today, I want to add some mixed pot displays. But I've chosen really with shape, form and leaf size in mind, you know. So the first thing I'm going to look to do is just arrange the plants. So this is a Sargococca. So this is Sargococca purple stem. Beautiful flower. Not just looks lovely, but the scent is incredible. So that becomes the point to build off. And then I'm just going to look to put some texture in front of it. So here we've got Polysticum fern, which is a lovely evergreen fern. Deal with dry, sort of shady conditions in the woodland. But you can see straight away there's some interest without the flower. And then this is another real hard-working plant. You probably see this in around car parks, you know. It's Pachysandra, so it's something that will deal with shade really well. But again, as the season goes on, it'll have a lovely white flower. And the detail is going to be provided by a tiny little bit of cyclamen in here, and then the vinca. And then that will just come down the back here. I used all peat-free compost. So to give you an idea, you know, I've got 5 parts peat-free compost, 3 parts soil, and I use sterilised soil from bags, and then added to that I use horticultural sand. But I know that's quite nicely balanced and probably hold a decent amount of moisture in there. So what I've done there as well is the Polysticum, though it sits as a lovely feature in this pot, I've used it as an individual down here as well. So you get these lovely sort of little connections. So though I don't want these pots to be exactly the same, I don't mind repeating the odd things. So if you imagine now, you know, it's repeated, going boom, 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 you know, it just carries the eye. Work that. And then we've got the hart's tongue fern. So that really sets us up. So we've got a white cyclamen, and our little euonymus might come in handy. And the final little beauty is this hellebore. And this hellebore is called Double Ellen White. And wow, look, absolutely incredible. That'll just give me a tiny little highlight and it will flower its heart away. So just add a couple more of these in here. And actually, as that white's going in, straight away picking up on that hellebore on the other side. And these beautiful little cyclamen just sitting there. If you look, you know, straight away that cyclamen looks really comfortable with the pittosporum. So it's not just what's going on in the pot, it's what's going on around it as well. So that one last detail. Can you imagine the old hostas are starting to go over now, but it's going to leave big voids, you know, through the winter. So what I want to do is add just a few little crocus in patches, just in the lighter areas. They'll work quite happily in semi-shade. So they want to go in sort of reasonably well-drained soil, about 3 inches deep. So this little crocus is called Whitewell Purple. You imagine by the time they've come up and they've done their business, they'll be fading away and the hostas will be back. So I think, you know what, even in the middle of January, wrapped up maybe with a scarf on, and it probably won't be 5 o'clock in the morning, but when it gets light, I'm going to come here, I'm going to have a moment, and I'm going to enjoy it. Why not think about in the next couple of weeks how much more you can get out of your garden over the winter months?
Well, Adam is right. There's certainly lots that you can do now to improve things in January and February. What you can do now, not for winter, but for next spring, is start to sow sweet peas. These early October sown ones, if you can store them, give you flowers as early as late May, if you're lucky, and certainly in June. And the reason for that is they make bigger, stronger plants, and that is the key to success with sweet peas. Now, I've got a batch here, some of which are old favourites, some of which I'm trying for the first time. We've got Cupani, the original sweet pea, brought in from Sicily at the end of the 17th century. And then I've got some new colours here. I've got Top Hat, which looks a sort of lovely, intense purple. But I've got a white one I want to start sowing here, which is a new one, Memorial Flight, which has really good fragrance and nice big flowers, which I'm going to plant out into the writing garden. Now, like all members of the pea family, sweet peas have a long root. So if you do sow them in a seed tray, you're going to have to transplant them very early. Much better to sow them either in a pot or a root trainer. And root trainers are very useful for this. I've had these for ages, so they're a bit fragile, but I'm trying to reuse them as much as possible. So what you do with root trainers is close them up, and they have a special container. And so the roots all grow downwards, are easy to get out, and then when you plant them out, immediately grow deep. And so you get a really strong root system. I just need to fill them up with soil. Any normal peat-free potting compost will do the job perfectly well. If we just put 2 per container. And if you don't have root trainers, a little pot like that, either square or round, is perfect. And I put 2 or 3 seeds in each pot. What I like to do is sow some in October, and then I have another sowing in February, and they're ready to plant out perhaps a month or so later. Now I just push down the seeds so that they're firmly in the soil. So if I just cover those over, just sprinkle them over with a bit of compost like that, I will give these a good soak and put them in the greenhouse. They don't need any bottom heat. They will germinate at quite low temperatures, and you'll start to see the little shoots appear in about a week to 10 days. Grow them on until they're a couple of inches tall, and then they can spend the winter in a cold frame. Is absolutely ideal, or a cool greenhouse. Probably best not to leave them outside. Water them occasionally, but leave them over winter. They're not going to grow much. But then, next February, they will start to show signs of growth. Grow them on, and then they can be planted out directly from the root trainer or the pot in April. Now, it's time to visit the first of your gardens. And this comes from Anya Bark in Warsaw, in Poland.
Hello, my name is Ania. I come from Poland. Welcome to a small garden on my balcony. I live in a block of flats in Warsaw, the capital of Poland. We are on the 4th floor, so you can see here a net protecting our cat. And here you can see a special window for our dog. I love gardening. This spring I spent a lot of time at home working remotely, and I decided to arrange this little space in a completely different way without typical flowers. For example, in these hanging flower pots, I'm growing only perennials for the first time, and I hope they will survive winter. These are grasses, succulents, and some ground cover plants. What I really like about them is the variety of leaves. They have different sizes, shapes, and structures. Although I have no blooming flowers, my garden is full of color all summer long. I'm especially proud of my collection of coleus. I'm growing them from cuttings. I absolutely love them. They look beautiful, showy, and grow so quickly. I wish more people knew about them. I really enjoy spending here a free time every day after work. It's easy to calm down and relax when you see green plants all around you. My garden makes me happy. I would like to thank you for your patience. I'm still learning English. Greetings from Warsaw. Take care of you. Bye-bye.
Well, it's very good to hear from Anya from Warsaw, although I can't help but wonder how those coleus are going to fare in a Polish winter. Perhaps you'll let us know, Anya, next spring. Now, a little job that actually can't just be done today in preparation for winter, but can begin, is taking stock of the pond now that we're well and truly in autumn. And if you've got a wildlife pond, which essentially this is, there are lots of creatures that are going to spend the winter in the water and particularly down in the mud at the bottom. So you need to do things fairly carefully. The first thing to do is get a net and just gently scoop through it, trying to disturb it as little as necessary, I think is the key. Scooping out dead leaves, dead vegetation. But the important thing is not just to flick it on the side, but gently put it to one side so that any creatures in amongst the mud and the leaves have time to crawl out. So I always just put them down here, that can go there, and then we'll have another scoop. Now, over winter, algae is not such a problem because it needs sun to thrive. But if there are too many nutrients in the water, that is what they feed on come next spring. And the nutrients come from the decaying vegetation, which is why you want to take it out. So we'll just take that out there. The other bit of kit which works very well with ponds is a standard wire rake. And what I'm going to do is go in with this. There we go. I can get in there, there's a lot of gubbins in there. There we go, look at that. All this material here, I can cut back. I'm gonna just put that down. Put that on the side. Now these flag irises tend to flop down in, so where they touch the water, I'm cutting back. If you can get them out before they biodegrade and rot, so much the better. This is something that it's worth doing 2 or 3 times over the next few weeks, particularly scraping out fallen leaves, because inevitably, if you have trees anywhere near a pond, leaves are going to either fall into it or blow into it. Where you have water lilies, you don't need to cut all the leaves back, but any that are yellowing or actively dying, cut those back. There is actually something rather calming about standing in cold water, gently fishing around for soggy dead material. Who would have thought it? Well, I'm going to carry on pottering around in here, but we've got another chance now to revisit the garden of Kate and Hitesh Patel in Chepstow and share their love of ornamental grasses.
I just love the noise that they make. It's quite soothing and I think quite evocative as well. And the way the light catches the leaves introduces an element of light and brightness, lifts your spirits. And they feel gorgeous, and it's very hard to resist running your hands through them.
I love the movement of them, especially when they're planted in masses and the wind catches them. It's almost like an ocean wave.
Well, we lived in Southeast Asia for several years and were surrounded by bamboos, which are just big grasses, and grew them on our balcony in Bangkok.
When we were travelling, we saw a lot of grasses just growing wild, and we thought actually they look fabulous and would be great to grow.
When you buy grasses, they're very small. They take a long time, some of them 2-3 years to mature, and it's very easy for them to get swamped by their neighbours and look a bit sad. I think if you've got room, then one of the most exciting things you can do is to mass them, and using them as hedges and screens or a sort of large matrix planting. They look fantastic. They're much more versatile, I think, than people think. This one is a Hacknacloa macra. It's just brilliant for softening the edges of hard landscaping. We've got a very scruffy patio, circa 1981, and the less we can see of it, the better. I like to grow the grasses in pots. Some of the exotic ones suit pot life because they've got to come in and out of the greenhouse. The Pennisetum villosum, that's quite tender in this area. Other things like the phalaris, which is just going over here, would run in the garden. It would be an awful thug, to the point where some people might call it invasive even. But in a pot you can find it, so it's a good way of getting the effect of these sort of white toothpastey flower leaves without risking it overtaking its neighbours. Grasses work very well with a lot of flowering perennials. I think the traditional ones are always the daisy-shaped flowers, so you can use chocolate cosmos, which will give you a nice extended period of flower. Asters work very well in planted borders, especially with some of the taller grasses. I like to use quite a lot of Posicarea. Anything really that you might imagine would grow naturally with a grass in a field is often a good way to look at it. Personally, I love self-seeders. I wouldn't be without them, and I wouldn't have the garden that I've got without them. I can understand they might be a nuisance for some people, and if they are, then perhaps they should look to either grasses that are sterile, the Callum grostis, or go for something like Miscanthus sinensis, which is a warm season grass that won't actually be able to develop the seed and ripen the seed because our growing season is so much shorter. So I think there are other ways of dealing with the problem than not growing them at all.
All the Calamagrostis and the Miscanthus here has been subdivided. So the plants have been grown for over 2-3 years. We started with about tens of each of them, but we needed hundreds to do the planting. You can get 10-20 plants out of each plant.
Grasses are a great value. They don't have sort of one look. They go through 4 seasons of interest, and then they thin to an ethereal sort of ghostly skeleton of their summer self.
I really enjoyed Hitesh and Kate's garden, and I completely agree with them about the textures you get from grasses and that lovely sound that they make as the wind gently works through them. But also at this time of year, they have fabulous colour, particularly the Miscanthus, and there are lots of different Miscanthuses. Now, still to come on today's programme. Carol revels in the dazzling autumnal colours at Hidcote Manor Garden in Gloucestershire. But first we're going to West Yorkshire, because Mike Hobson has sent us a film celebrating his passion for summer flowering heathers.
Hello, and welcome to our garden here in Holmfirth in West Yorkshire. I wanted to show you some of our summer flowering heathers which we've got growing in the garden. You can see one growing here as an individual plant, or they can be planted en masse, as you can see here on this steep banking. There are several types of summer flowering heathers. This one is a cinerea, or a bell heather, and this one has been flowering for about 8 weeks. And there are the Cornish heathers. This is Erica vagans. These have got quite long flower spikes, and they are very popular with the bees, as you can see here. This one is Derbyshire. These have got large bells on them. And then we've got Kalunas. This one's called Peter Sparks, and this one's just coming into flower now. So between them, they provide a good long season of colour from early July right through into October. Very hardy and very easy to grow, even in really poor soil. Once established, they cope with a wide range of conditions, dry or wet, exposed or partial shade. They come in a wide range of foliage colours, so even when they're not flowering, they provide some colour in the garden. They're evergreen, and they create good ground cover, suppressing weeds very effectively without being too invasive. As far as looking after heathers in general, they're very easy to look after. They need an ericaceous soil, and then once a year they need a clip, either with shears or a hedge trimmer. And this is very important, otherwise they will get straggly. I usually cut my heathers back in spring around the end of April. So if you're looking for some late summer colour, try some summer flowering heathers. Bye from West Yorkshire.
It is worth repeating what Mike did say, which is that you need ericaceous soil for heathers to thrive. That means it's acidic. If you don't have ericaceous soil, which we don't here, I can't grow them, you could, of course, buy ericaceous compost and then grow them in a container. Now, October is a good time for pruning most roses, but particularly climbers. And I say climbers because it is worth differentiating between climbers and ramblers. Rambling roses to be pruned immediately after flowering, so usually that's July or August. Whereas climbers produce their flowers on new growth. So you can prune them as hard as you like, they will regrow, and that regrowth is what flowers next year. Now this is a noisette rose, which is Madame Alfred Carrière. And noisettes have this very lax growth. You can see that it's sort of flopping away from the wall. And if I didn't prune it, it would just get sprawlier and sprawlier, but in proportion to the rose itself, fewer and fewer. So in order to make it look good, it is important to prune it quite hard. So we'll start here, and I can go right back like that. I can pull that out. So we cut these back at the base. So what you're left with are these stubs, which are all you need, as long as there is a bud there, to provide next year's flowering shoots. Just take them back like that. When you're pruning any rose, try and think of the skeleton that you want it to look like when you've finished. If you hold that in mind, then you can cut back into that. Right. Can you see this area here? We've got the beginnings of a tangle of growth. Wherever possible, you want to try and avoid having any branches crossing any others. So they should all splay away from each other. And wherever you have branches rubbing against either other branches or the wall or a wire, infection and disease and fungus can get into the wound. So I'm going to take this right out. I'm going to go right back to there. I will cut back to here, like that. This is not something that you should rush out. Take your time. And if you make the wrong cut, the great saving grace of climbing roses is that they grow back incredibly quickly. Now, it's time to join Frances on her allotment, where she takes a look back at this growing year.
My year on the allotment has been a welcome escape, a place to exercise my body and heal my mind. Like all of us, I have had some successes and some not so great successes. But now it's time to take stock of my little plot. This has been one of my very surprising successes. This is the lemongrass that was in my greenhouse last year. And then this winter, Storm Dennis knocked down my greenhouse, leaving this non-hardy plant exposed to the elements. But luckily, it was very, very mild last winter. So rather than take my chances with this winter, because we don't know what that will bring, I'm digging it up. I've removed all of the horsetail from the roots and put it in a pot, and I'll take it home and put it indoors, where it'll be safe and warm, ready for planting out next spring. There, that's a survivor, that one. And something else that's done very well is this. This is Prima Donna. It's a dwarf hop in its first year and in such a windy site. I'm actually really impressed with how well it's done. Now the flower is the all-important bit that you need for brewing. You can hear when it's ready by just crackling it, and it makes that lovely papery sound. Now this is actually a bract that protects something called the lupulin glands, which are found inside, and you'll see that lovely yellow pollen-like substance, and that's where all the essential oils are that give beer its flavour. I'm harvesting these hops for a local brewing cooperative. Or you could just cut down the vine and dry it to make a lovely autumn and winter decoration. My first sowing of sweet corn this year was not at all successful, but you can see that the second one has been. I've had a really good crop. Now this is Swift, and it's a really, really healthy plant with lots of good cobs on it. Interestingly though, they're all a lot shorter than they would be on a normal year. It's been very dry and obviously very windy, and that may have stunted them. You can tell when your sweet corn is ripe by these tassels on the top of it. Once they've turned brown, it's ready for picking. I absolutely love sweet corn. It's something that I will grow every year, and it's great trying out all the different varieties. But you might notice there's also some weeds growing in here, and I've let them stay. This is fat hen. It's a close relative of quinoa, so you can take those seeds and you can eat them, either raw or cook them like a grain, and you can also eat the leaves like spinach. So some weeds this year I'm embracing wholeheartedly. I'm still harvesting lots of veg. The beetroot and kale have been really productive, along with my favourite, courgette. And this is called Floridor, and it seems to absolutely love my allotment, which is rare actually for plants, but I have so many of them, and it's got even more still coming so late in the season, so I'm definitely growing this one again next year. But it's not all about harvesting at the moment. It's also about thinking about next year, and I am trying to save as many seeds as I can for next year's crop. I've eaten so many of these runner beans this year, so they're definitely worth saving. Also a rather delicious tomato called Gardener's Delight. Saving your beans really couldn't be easier. All you need to do is let them go dry on the vines like this, brown and crackly, and then you open them up and you'll have lovely seeds inside. There we go. Oh, look at the colours. They're so beautiful. Now just keep this somewhere cool and dry for the winter and then sow them in the spring. And the reason I'm doing this with my beans is partly because I want to save some money next year, but also because a lot of these are varieties I don't know. They were given to me by friends and they're absolutely delicious. So I definitely want to grow them again, but I wouldn't even be able to buy them if I wanted to because I wouldn't know what to look for. Another seed that I'm very keen to save this year is this humble tomato. I had it growing in the greenhouse last year and everything got blight, but this one self-seeded and grew all year and it didn't get blight, so I'm hoping it's a quite resistant variety, which means it'll be a good one to grow next year. But the method for taking these seeds is a little bit more complicated. All I need to do is just chop it in half, just using a sieve. All I need to do is scoop out the seeds that are here, surrounded by the jelly. And now, using a wooden spoon, I'll gently mash that into the sieve in the hope of removing as much of that jelly as possible because it actually inhibits the germination of the seed, so it really needs to be gone. And when you're picking a tomato to do this, make sure you pick a perfectly ripe one, and the seeds will have fully formed inside. Now, to finally get this jelly off properly, I'm going to put all these seeds into water. Told you it was fiddly. There we go. Now I'll take that probably into the shed for a couple of days and you'll see the jelly will just come off, and when there's a layer floating on the top of the water, you know it's ready. Sieve it off, put these seeds onto some kitchen towel to dry them, and then leave them nice and dry until next year when they're ready for sowing. Seeing the plot grow through the year, the beautiful cut flowers and lots of fresh vegetables has been incredible and has saved me a lot of money. I think I've learned a lot too. Because of the weeds, I've developed a much more relaxed approach to vegetable growing, and the plots become much wilder for it. And that's something that's helped bring in an abundance of insects. Flowers this year really have been glorious, and in fact just having the space has been amazing as an escape from the world, especially during the lockdown. But I have to say, there's nothing better after a hard day's graft than sitting here on the bench that Adam made me, enjoying a drink and watching the sun go down. And then it really does feel like my own little piece of heaven.
I do think when house prices are so high and gardens getting smaller and smaller, allotments are doubly important. And you can see from Francis, they're not just a place where you can grow a few veg, they are a whole horticultural experience. Now here in the spring garden, there is life, but most of it is under the soil, getting ready for the display that will begin just after Christmas and last through to the end of May. But right now there is one distinct star, which is this, which is Rhododendron luteum. It's actually an azalea, despite the rhododendron name. And it has fabulous yellow flowers in spring with really good fragrance. And now it's got superb autumn colours. Now this feels like a good moment to rejoin Carol as she paid a visit to Higcup Manor Garden in Gloucestershire to celebrate its glorious display of autumnal colour.
The showy blooms of summer may have disappeared, but this time of year has its own colour to offer. There are so many wonderful plants, all dressed up in gold, oranges, russets and reds. The autumn garden party is in full swing. It's a glorious time to be in the garden. The change in the colour of leaves on our trees is the very first sign of autumn. And there are so many different varieties of trees. Japanese maples are the archetypal trees for autumn colour. Even those with coloured foliage, though, adopt more brilliant hues at this time of year. Well, the trees are glorious, but perhaps it's this plant that produces the most pyrotechnic display of the whole of autumn. And it's a vine. It's Vitis cognitii, and it's surely one of the most rapacious plants ever. It'll climb way up into the trees, all along fences, hedges, nothing stops it. If you're growing it in a small garden, then you really have to train it well. When you see some plants come out in the garden, then you just know it's autumn. And probably the most typical is the Michaelmas daisy. These great, huge clouds of flowers that just flower with free abandon everywhere. This is Ceratostigma wilmotianum. It's just a green presence all the way through the summer, but then, when autumn arrives, the fireworks really begin. You get these brilliant blue flowers accompanied by red, orange, amber, russet leaves. What a glorious concoction. As well as shrubs and herbaceous plants, there are a whole load of bulbs that actually use the autumn to shoot through the ground and give their finest display. Things like these autumn flowering crocus, beautiful chalices of lavender with great big orange stamens. And don't they look just perfect with these fallen cherry leaves? These are true crocus, but there are other bulbs that look very, very similar, colchicums, but they're members of the lily family. And if you're going to plant them really, really deep, and they'll reward you with those beautiful flowers year after year. But right now, I'm down with the crocus and enjoying every moment. There are plants here in the iconic red borders at Higcup that are in their autumn glory too. Things like this berberis. It's been dark and mysterious all through the summer, but now its leaves are changing to reds, ambers, glowing colours, and each little branch has tiny red berries dropping from it, almost like beads. There's the lovely Cotinus that's got these big, gorgeous, dark leaves which are getting redder by the day. It's been pruned so that it makes these big leaves and strong shoots. But alongside it are plants that have been going strong since the summer, but they've joined in the autumn garden party. This deep red rose, Frensham, has been flowering since June, and it will go on flowering right the way through to the frost. It's covered in buds. And this is an idea that anybody can try in their own garden. You don't need these huge, huge borders to put summer flowering stuff which continues to flower into the autumn alongside things which are renowned for being at their best in this season. This garden's absolutely exquisite, and these beds are completely composed of plants which are tender, that have just been bedded out. Running right the way through everything is this lovely, deep, rusty orange Bidens, and it contrasts so beautifully with the big purple leaves of that Eupatorium. And it's not just the colour and the form, you've got all these differences in texture. Some of it's soft and fluffy, and other things like the Phacrea with big, sharp, pointy leaves. I think it's delightful, and it's something that anybody could achieve. And you don't even need big borders like this. You could do the whole thing in a pot. Add a little miscanthus, this one's morning light, and you'll still achieve the same effect. I think it's brilliant. If we choose our plants carefully, autumn can become the very zenith of the year. We can fill our gardens with plants with brilliant hues and textures that shine out as everything else starts to mellow and fade.
I've been to here quite a few times, but never in autumn. It certainly looks lovely. But one of my favourite autumnal displays are berries. And this is certainly the season of the berry. This time last year, I made this little berry bed. Obviously, the standout items are things like the Calicarpa with its tiny, bright purple metallic berries. We've got viburnums with blackberries, and now I want to add a few more. Nothing extraordinary, just some very ordinary plants, but really good both in flower and berry and easy to grow, and they're all berberis. This, which is Berberis coreana, which is deciduous, got really bright green leaves in spring, which turn a good, rich, dark red in autumn. Now this will grow quite big, so I'm going to put this at the back here. That will rise up. The crucial thing about Berberis, although they will grow in sun, they'll grow in shade, they'll grow in clay, they'll grow in chalk, they do need good drainage. Now whereas the coreana will grow quite tall, I've got two really good compact varieties, very different. The first one is Berberis thunbergii atropurpurea nana, which is quite a mouthful for what is actually quite a small plant. Any plant with nana in its name means that it's small. It's got a dwarfing form. And that should form a low, compact mound in front. This is Berberis darwinii compacta. The evergreen foliage of compacta is quite firm and very prickly. And then it has orange egg yolk yellow flowers in spring, followed by black fruits. I'm slightly mound planting these. And when we talk about mound planting, it means that the surface of the plant in the pot is actually an inch or so above the surface of the soil. And then you form the soil around it, so it's on a slight mound, and then you can mulch to level it off. If it's a plant like this and needs good drainage and you've got heavy soil, it just raises it up a bit and stops it getting saturated. Where you have roots like that in a pot, just a few little breaks, and that will encourage it to grow out. Now it's time to pay the last visit this week to one of your gardeners. And Aaron Greco has sent us a film from his home in Nottingham showing a creative horticultural use for old tyres.
Hey, what's up Gardeners World? My name is Aaron and I'm from Nottingham, and I'm about to show you my 2 homemade raised tyre planters. When I was building the tyre, I made sure that I lined the inside, making sure all the soil was kept inside, and underneath I made plenty of drainage holes for the rain to escape. And I've used these metal poles which used to be from an old gazebo. So as you can see in the centre, I've used a lavender plant that attracts all the pollinators to this planter, and either side of it I've got 2 yellow flowers, and at the back a random tomato plant. And in the shady area I've got a baby strawberry plant which I rescued from the mother plant. Moving on to my second planter, this one's probably my favourite one out of the 2. I just love how all the different plants are working together. It's a bit overcrowded, you could say, but I think it looks good like this. So at the front I decided to plant a strawberry plant. As you can see, there's some strawberries already growing. It's probably my favourite plant, berries and cream. It smells amazing and it attracts all the bees to this planter. And unlike the other planter, this one's actually got a hanging, swinging plant pot, and I decided to plant a pepper plant in it. And over here, my first ever pepper is growing. And this actually gets watered by the rainwater leaking through the bottom of the tyre. So yeah, these are my raised tyre planters. I hope I've inspired you guys to maybe make your own.
I really like Aaron's tyre containers, but just one word of advice is if you are going to make them like Aaron, then do line the tyres first with a non-permeable layer before putting in your potting compost. Now is a really good time to take evergreen cuttings from plants like yew, like box, or particularly any evergreen hedging or shrubs or trees. And these are just a couple of bags of yew cuttings. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 plants in there. And when you take evergreen cuttings, you can either take semi-ripe cuttings, which means that they are bendy, but they have hardened off a little bit. Or you can take hardwood cuttings, and I've done that as late as December and January, and that is from older, harder wood. And this applies to other evergreen plants too. But I'm going to take some semi-ripe cuttings now, and the thing to remember is if you choose a leader like this, you'll have more upright growth. If you want a bushier plant as a result, take a side shoot. So if I just cut here like that, and then I'm going to cut back here, there, and I've got another one there that's good. Okay. Strip off these lower leaves there, like that, and then I will cut that back so it is about that long there, just below a node. Okay. As with all cuttings, you need a nice free draining compost. So I've got my standard cutting mix, which is our normal homemade compost with lots of grit added. So we'll put that in there. And then it's very simple. Just pop it down in so it's completely buried in the corner of the pot. And I can take 4 cuttings in that pot. Take off the lower leaves like that. Strip that off. By keeping these side shoots on the cutting, I'm going for a really bushy plant from the outset. Pop that in the corner. I will water this, put it somewhere sheltered. It doesn't actually have to be in a greenhouse. You could leave this outside. You just don't want it to get waterlogged. And then they should root sometime next year. So this time next year, you may well be able to take them out and pot them on, but sometimes I leave them till the following spring. And they'll be ready to plant out in about 3 years' time. Okay, that's one job for this weekend. Here are some more. If you took semi-ripe cuttings in August, such as these pelargoniums, it's a good idea to pot them on now. I did a trial using pure perlite and a gritty compost mix. Although the perlite worked perfectly well, I think the gritty mix worked even better. Divide the cuttings up and pot them on individually into a nice free-draining compost. Keep them somewhere warm and dry all winter, and then they'll be ready to grow away strongly next spring. If you grow large, vigorous brassicas like purple sprouting broccoli or Brussels sprouts, they will need supporting before winter kicks in. Use good strong canes or stakes and drive them in firmly, and then tie them securely. That way, they'll be able to withstand the worst of the winter weather. Brick and paved paths can become very slippery at this time of year. And a very simple way of dealing with it is to use sharp sand. Sprinkle a little onto the path and brush it in vigorously with a really stiff brush. And this remains effective for 2 or 3 weeks. I love chicory, and this is a bed of Rosa di Verona, which is a radicchio, the familiar round, tightly packed ball of burgundy and red leaves. But to grow them, they go through 2 stages. You plant them out in May, and then they develop a mass of green leaves, which are completely inedible. They're very, very bitter, but they feed the taproot, which then produces redder leaves. And these old green leaves need to be taken off bit by bit, because the one thing that chicory hates is sitting with soggy leaves all around it. So I keep stripping them round so each plant has light and air. But when it comes to autumnal colour in the vegetable garden, nothing, but nothing is better than ruby chard. When the light shines through these cherry red stalks, it glows like a cathedral window, and they're really good to eat too. Well, that's it for today. I'll be back here at Longmeadow at the same time of 9 o'clock next week. So until then, bye-bye.